Hello out there. Welcome everybody to another update of the Novel 90 Writing Challenge. And eventually we are going to talk about our topic for today, which is how to know how to ensure that your idea for your book is solid before you start writing. Now, some of you may have already started writing, and Pantser, I'm looking at you, or maybe Team Planter. Planners, probably we haven't yet, although some people do write an outline really quick. Maybe you're off to the races already. But I figured this is a good time to take a quick smell check before we get too deep into the weeds and end up painting ourselves into a corner. Sometimes we can think a little bit ahead. So for those of you who are pantsers and plantsters, don't worry, I am not going to try to turn you into a planner with this presentation. I'm just going to give you some basic questions to think about as you get started, because again, I'm trying to help you avoid maybe some heartache a little bit later. Now, of course, the Novel 90 Writing Challenge is sponsored by AutoCrate. It is our home. We are presenting this event. And if you're not familiar with AutoCrate is, we are a home for writers. We have the fully functioning writing desk. We have our online community of fellow authors. We have our online academy page where instructors such as I go through different writing principles and genres and things like that. And we have personalized author services for one on one feedback and the like. So, really something for everyone. But for this challenge, it's probably pretty obvious from the name. We want you to write something in 90 days, and we want it to be in a releasable state at the end. Now, perhaps are going to publish it in January. Perhaps you're going to start submitting it to somebody, submit it to an agent or something like that. Our goal is that by January, you are at that point. You are like, yes, I could give this to the author I most respect, and I wouldn't be embarrassed. It's in a place that I am satisfied. So, yes, this is essentially writing a book in 90 days. Now, some of you are going to be using this time to finish a book. Fair enough, right? We're not asking that you have to start from scratch. Maybe you're going to write a compendium of short stories, and that will be your book. So it'll be multiple stories, like an anthology. Fair enough. Some of you are writing nonfiction. Really, we're just about writing here, right? Autocrit. We want to make fun. We want to have fun with everybody. We want to enjoy the writing experience, and we want to encourage all of you as artists to grow and to push yourselves. And so, this is just an incentive to get started and get writing. About half of you have never completed a book. I want that number to be zero by the end. I don't know if it quite will be. I could be optimistic, but yes, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? How many artists would be pushing themselves further than ever before, having some wind in their sails into 2025? That's exactly what we're trying to do. And yes, I already asked this question. I already asked this question first time. How many books have you written? Feel free to let us know in the chat. Maybe you haven't been on these first few live streams. Let us know. And yeah, I am not actually here right now. So if you're like, Daniel's not responding to my chat, I am actually out. So this is a recording, but we do have Autocrit representatives there in the chat. So feel free to keep the conversation going. We will answer questions as we encounter them. So one thing you need to do in the Novel 90 Writing Challenge is join a team. What kind of team can you join? Well, you can join the planner team. That's me. Whoop whoop. And we actually just had, excuse me, a kickoff session, a planning session. So if you didn't get a chance to see that session, go into the calendar, go into past events and find it. Or go to the AutoCrit Novel 90 base camp, and you can find that by clicking Academy and clicking the logo for Novel 90, and you can find the base camp. But anyway, Planner, Plantser, and Pantser all have had writing events by now. And so, yeah, go ahead and check out all those recordings if you are any of these teams. Maybe you've just joined the event, in which case, welcome aboard. You still got what uh 80 days, 75 days left. I'm not doing good math on the top of my head. Yeah, something like that. 80, yeah. I'm doing this quick math. All right, Pantser. You might be Team Pantser, in which case you're with the captain is a Catherine. Captain Catherine, Coach Catherine. And you have your lovely emu. I don't know if the emu has been named yet. Maybe they named it at the last planning session. You should check that out if that was the case. A little check in there. I think they did a vote, so you can find out what your team mascot is called. Team Plancer. That's with Becca. So if you like to blend everything and do the best of both worlds, feel free to join that team. And again, they just had a check-in event recently. Check out the events in the past events in the calendar or in the base camp if you want to see the recording. Generally, we're thinking of October as sort of a planning, a pre-writing session. Now, pantsers are already getting started writing because you got to stay ahead of schedule. Planners are mixing it up a little bit. Planners, I'm giving you a little bit more time, but I really do want you getting writing soon. And so this will be a great final test. Again, if you want to go to that event I just did, you can find out more info about some of my procedures to test my outline. November, we'll do a lot of writing, of course, drafting, drafting, drafting. December, editing. This is more or less a guideline. Again, your mileage may vary. This is an opportunity, of course, to build writing habits, and ultimately, this is for you. We want you to stop slowing yourself down with perfectionism. Please, whenever you come into these check-in events, we don't expect perfection. Just let us know what you're doing. Ask for feedback, right? Keep moving forward though, especially in the drafting stage. That first draft, you gotta just press forward, get the words on the page. Don't second guess everything. It's better if it's sloppy and you have to do a lot of rewrites than if you don't finish at all. Turn off that editor in terms of any copy editing, typos, things like that. I know we have to fix them sometimes because they drive us mad, but be cautious with that. It can kill your productivity. And don't just trash writing, you're writing, chasing a word count. This isn't like that. We're not like you must write X number of words in so many days or something like that. We want a completed product. And so, yes, you should have goals and you probably want to have goals in order to stay on trend. But obviously, if you're just lorem ipsum or blah, 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 putting it on the page, you're not really helping yourself, right? So if you have to take a breather, get a drink, uh, you know, think about it a bit before you write, that is okay. Again, push yourself forward. I'm not saying second guess everything you have written, right? But if you're having the funk, maybe take a quick breather, jump around a little bit, listen to some music, go back. The last thing you want to do is just force a bunch of crap on the page, right? Ultimately, this challenge is about you. So these are all our suggestions, but it's ultimately about you and it's what's going to make it successful for yourself. I've heard so many wonderful stories already because we're doing these little challenges and we're even texting each other. Yeah, you can go in the base camp and you can sign up and you can even get texts from us. Isn't that bananas, right? And it's so much fun because we're like interacting and they're like, "Oh, I was at the supermarket and this came to mind and I have this revelation in my book," and I'm just loving it. It's so much fun. But yes, this challenge is about you. Everybody's going to have different paths of victory. Make your own victory. 2025 is going to be amazing, right? But that brings me to my topic for today. One way that we can help ensure victory for ourselves is to know if our story idea is a good one. Now, is there like a litmus test of this? Of course not, right? And what I mean by good idea, of course, is subjective anyway. What is a good idea, right? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That sounds kind of silly. Depends on who you are. Some people think it's silly. Some people think it's amazing, right? So it's really whether or not you will think it's a good idea by the end of it, whether or not you will be proud of the work, you will be excited by your art by the end of it. That's what I'm getting at. So, how can you kind of predict the future to where you don't get two-thirds in, and you're like, nah, I don't really like this anymore. Or you lose your luster for it because it didn't quite have enough going for it to begin with. That's what I'm getting at. A non-starter sort of book. All right, well, there's a few things you can think about. One thing is no matter what, ideas matter less than execution. So while I'm going to mention a lot of things that are in the ideation stage, keep in mind execution is everything. So it could be that one of the reasons you're going to feel blah later on, and it can happen. I hope not. I'm not trying to will it into existence, but it can happen. Is just because you can tell the execution isn't what you want, in which case you just keep writing anyway. You fix it in post, or it can be that your idea is not as great as you thought, and you need to pivot. Right, like you got stuck on a darling. You really attached to something. And so by thinking about some of the ideas in advance, you can smooth it out. But sometimes it's going to be a matter of can you actually pull off your idea, right? So keep that in mind. But we're going to stick mostly to the ideation stage. We're going to get to how to make your execution powerful later. So when it comes to the ideation stage, keep in mind you can be overly clever. It's not important that you twist yourself into a pretzel being as imaginative and crazy as possible. Sometimes settling is the correct thing to do, particularly before your first draft, while you're writing your first draft, right? Sometimes it is about the path of least resistance. Now, does this mean you will be maybe as excited or as proud at the end until you fix it? No, but it is a way to move forward, right? Again, the idea is to try to create an idea that doesn't get you stuck. And if you make it overly complicated, perhaps you will get stuck because you're not going to really know what the point of the whole thing was. What is the core of it? What was I actually trying to say with this whole thing, etc. Right? Weird combinations can create an it factor. So I'm going to kind of go against my last advice in that the path of least resistance, right? One thing that can get you excited is the path of more resistance, right? Doing something that people you just haven't seen before. Now, of course, this comes with a difficulty of execution. If you are mimicking something that you've seen a bunch of times, the possibility that you're going to mimic it successfully is a little bit bigger. I mean, you can think of like ingredients in your kitchen, right? Imagine you open up your refrigerator and you look at all these ingredients and you think of what are some things that are similar to recipes I've tried before, and then how much deviation do I want? Or do I want to just like go hog wild and be like, well, this flavor profile might work with this flavor profile, and I'm just going to wing it? As you can imagine, that third option is probably going to create more misfires, right? And for food, we wouldn't do that very often because you don't often have the luxury of just wasting a bunch of ingredients, right? Now, thankfully, when it comes to a book, yeah, I mean, you essentially can. It's time, but you can just keep writing words, right? So you can keep changing them around. And so the fact that you're not going to get it right on the first pass is not that big of a deal. But keep in mind that, just like I said before, in terms of cleverness, weird combinations, the more you layer on, the weirder it's going to get, the harder it's going to be to find your footing because you can't compare it to any success in the past. You are blazing a trail. It's like the difference between moving into an established neighborhood and trying to be a pioneer in the middle of nowhere. And I love pioneers, right? I love people who innovate and push boundaries and all of that. I'm not telling you not to do that. But especially if you're newer, if you've never finished a book before, be a little bit cautious about that, because when I say that execution matters, this is going to be harder to have an execution you're going to love. So just think about that and whether or not maybe you want to pull back the scope in terms of the weirdness a little bit. Have some weirdness, but maybe you don't need to quite go that far. One thing that I've seen a lot of new artists do that can be frustrating is they'll hear from me things like, well, this is generally how books are done, and this is generally a good framework. I don't even like to use the word formula because, again, I think of it more like a recipe. And I guess a recipe is a formula in a sense, but I like to think of more like what do all the ingredients do so that you can make your own recipe on the fly, right? Similar to what I said. Not completely off the rails, similar to things you know already, but you know what you can modify because you understand the ingredients, right? Well, anyway, if you are just winging it like crazy, right, and you're throwing in every little bit, it's of course a lot harder for you to pull it off. And so that execution, you're more likely going to get stuck. So just keep that in mind. Well, what I was saying was is that a lot of artists who hear a lot about these guidelines and stuff, I kind of got sidetracked. They will be like, "Well, I'm not going to do that. I am going to write a story without an antagonist. I'm going to write one with a protagonist as the antagonist. I'm going to write one and whatever." And some of this is just framing. It's just the rhetoric you use to describe your art, and that's fine. But some of it is literally like, I think they just want to be different. And again, they're artists, makes sense, but they can often create themselves a world of trouble because you don't always have to go crazy. Plenty of successful restaurants are just making the best burger. It's not inventing a new dish you've never heard of in your entire life. It's okay. That is an equally valid form of art. So I just want to bring that up just so that you don't. I mean, I don't want you to feel the pressure of the weird combination. I think sometimes artists can overdo that. Okay. What is your hook though, right? What is making you excited about this project? You really want to ask yourself, how excited am I about this project? How can I make myself more excited? If I had to explain this book simply to somebody else, what would I say? Now, if you're a pantser, this might be basically all you have, right? Because I mean, it depends on how little you plan. Some pantsers literally don't plan at all. So it's just like, okay, a mermaid's in love with a vampire. Go, right? Yeah, fair enough, right? But you want to make sure that that hook is something you are very excited about because especially if you're growing everything off of that, try to put as much into that as possible. And can you say a little bit more? A mermaid is in love with a vampire who is secretly betrothed to a werewolf, and they all have to break the spell of a demonic for you know what I mean? Like, you can bake a little bit more into it than perhaps just that little bit. And I know at a certain point you're like, well, that sounds like a plan and an outline. I get it. But ask yourself, how much are you comfortable baking into that hook to get yourself the most excited? Because this is the fuel that's going to give you the momentum for your entire run. So keep that in mind. This gets kind of to the elevator pitch, right? Um, Generally speaking, you should be able to give me an elevator pitch. Now, I know again, a pantser, you may only be able to give me an elevator pitch for the opening. Well, it starts with blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, was that a good hook? Is that a good, interesting starting point? That might not even be the starting point in a month, right? But for now, it's getting you excited. It's going to make you work. For a planner, you should be able to give me the core conflict of the story like that. It's they need to do X to achieve X. Bam, right? If you can't, then I would say you should look at your plan and how complicated it is. If you have to be like, well, there's this kingdom and this tribe and this magic system and blah blah blah. That's all fun and games, and I'm not saying that any of that is bad. But can you distill it in a quick, I only have 15 seconds of your time? What is the major through line? If you can't, again, I worry about how complicated you're making this and whether or not your execution is going to suffer because you sort of know what you're doing, but you don't exactly, in terms of you don't know that core story. And Plancer, you're going to be somewhere in the middle between this. It's whether, how much do you actually think it out? You may not have a complete handle on your core story just yet, but you should have more than a Pantser. And you might have just as much as a planner. It depends on what you plans, right? All right. You want to ask yourself, who is this for? Of course, it's for you. It should be. You should be excited about it. If you're not excited about it, no, this is not your idea, right? Mm-mm. Now, maybe you're not excited because you're like, I just need to get it done. I mean, I'm not like that with my fourth book in that I'm still excited about it, but there is a part of it that's more of I just need to get it done, right? And perhaps if I didn't have this weighing in my head, I would have picked another project. Although I'm still very excited about that project. But you do want to ask yourself, who is this for, right? And the thing about that is it can be so motivating because for like these are for people that like this book and they don't have other books to go to, or for people who would like this book but would like it to be this way and there's no other book like that. That can make you really excited to write the book, and again, that can be fuel to move you forward. So that's not only something to think about, it's something to write down. Again, I say build up that note board in the writer's desk, right? Everybody has access to it right now, even if you're a free member, and all Novel 90 challenge participants are free members. So go ahead, sign into the writer's desk, right? Click that yellow button in the upper right, note cards. Look at that. And you can build your own note board and you could say, who is this for? Put it in there because those are people that you're going to want to think about a lot. Make sure to be passionate. I struggle with this. I'm a very apathetic person. No, but you need to really care about what you're doing, right? This is where, for those of you who are very analytical, maybe you could say a little bit cynical, you can write to the market. You can say, well, people really like this sort of thing right now. That's generally not the best way of making great art. Right? We've all seen it. We've seen the books and we watch the movies where you're like, oh, they're just hopping on that gravy train, aren't they? And they don't even and the problem is that if you're not passionate about it, you're probably not going to have good execution. because you don't know why people like it. There are dishes. I'm going to keep just torturing this food metaphor. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm a little hungry right now. Actually, I am. I didn't have lunch yet. Anyway, but note, always record after I do lunch. Anyway, so if there was a dish that I hadn't ever experienced before, or maybe I had like once, I wouldn't be like, oh, just because a lot of people like it, I'm gonna have a really great riff on this dish. I'm sure I'm gonna execute it properly. No, because I don't know it very well, right? So if you're not passionate about that type of story, it probably means you haven't been exposed much to that type of story, which probably means you're not going to have a good execution on that kind of story, right? It'll be uncanny valley. It'll be weird. It'll be like somebody trying to tick off the boxes and not quite understanding what they're doing. So I really don't recommend doing that. I recommend picking something that you yourself are excited about, right? In some manner. It may not even be your favorite thing to write, but you are still excited about it. Why? Have a reason. And no, not because you think you can make lots of money on it. Again, that's not necessarily I don't have an issue with that in terms of motivation. Money matters, but I don't think it's going to make for good art. Not to mention, it's a little bit of a risk because the odds are not high. Um, so, what is your what if? This kind of gets back to the elevator pitch, right? Or maybe you could say the weird attractor, although it doesn't have to necessarily be that weird of combination to have a what if necessarily. It could be pretty straightforward. Um, what if unicorns were real? That would be pretty weird. But it could be, what if somebody who always struggled with public speaking rises to the occasion? That's not a particularly weird premise, but it is a what if, right? And again, this speaks to that core story. How much do you know that core story now? The more you know it, the less rewriting you're going to have to do later, the more clarity you're going to bring on the page, the more excitement, energy, conflict, all the good things you're going to bring on the page as well. Try making it bigger. So just entertain this. I thought this. What if it was bigger? What if I kind of blew it up? There is a problem with zombies in a small town. What if it's a global problem with zombies? Somebody discovers magic that helps them levitate. What if the magic helps them fly 80 feet in the sky? Right? Sometimes we'll throttle our ideas because we're worried about the acceptance of the audience. We're like, well, they'll accept this, but they won't accept that. And it's true to a certain extent. You have to watch what, mulligans, as they say. You have to give your audience has to give you what things the audience has to accept for your story to function. You want to be cautious about that. But on the other hand, you don't want to be so cautious that you prevent yourself from having really interesting, impactful, and uh, memorable stories because you went there. You went that big. And this doesn't even have to be like, the examples I gave. You could say, well, what if their romantic relationship isn't just something where it'll be sad because they break up because they're lonely? No, what if there are other implications? It damages their life in some major way. It can make it impossible for them to love again for some reason, or it could even um, threaten their reputation in some way. You know what I mean? Like, figure out ways that perhaps you can blow up the stakes more, because this is another place where you might get stuck later on. One of the reasons why there's the second act sag, the messy middle, whatever people call the center of the story, is because you don't have enough growth. You don't have a big enough place to get to, and things like that. Another way you could make it bigger is, how much does the character change throughout the story, right? Do you ultimately want them to be the queen of the country? How much of a change? Are they just somebody in the court who is not going to be in line of succession and through a random political machinations are going to end up there? Or are they a commoner who, through some crazy machinations, end up there? Perhaps a whole revolution or something, right? Again, think of the scope of the story. And yes, what is that central conflict? I'm going to keep going back to this because it might be a dead horse to you, but you really need to think this through. Now, all of you who know me and have been around, yes, take the drink now. I always speak to the three main motivating factors, just because it's just so inherent. It's like one of those things you just pretty much have to talk about, right? And people say, money, sex, God. I say status, meaning and relationships, right? Or love. And so, yes, what can they achieve something that's this tangible thing, like staying alive, winning the lottery, becoming the gold medalist, right? Or is it I need to maintain or create a new relationship? Or is it I need to learn something about myself or I need to solve some problem in the world? Ask yourself, what is that central conflict? And again, can you give it to me like that? And again, if you're a pantser and you're like, I don't quite know yet, that's okay. Hooks are fine. Conflict is better though. So if you are going to task yourself to not pants something, conflict is good. A goal, right? It's not just a cool hook where, it's a I always go back to the mermaid and the vampire. The mermaid who's in love with the vampire, right? Well, you could say, well, that's the central conflict. It's the relationship. Not necessarily a mermaid who wants to figure out what is causing the fish to die in her reef falls in love with a vampire. And now you have more clarity as what kind of story it was. The first thing was a romance. The second one is not necessarily, right? It could be or it could not be. It could still be a romance that just has a bookend plot, but maybe it's not anymore. So think about that. And that can be very helpful for your framing. You also want to ask yourself about all the different world reactions to that problem. How does everybody else think about it? Now, there are some stories where it may seem like nobody really cares, or not many, and those are like isolationist sort of stories, right? Because there's not a lot of other people around. But often you're not going to have that small of a cast, and you will have other characters around. And the reason why they're around is because they're involved in the problem or the solution of the main conflict, and they will therefore have different reactions to it. So, classic example would be something like Disney's The Little Mermaid, right? What does Ariel want to do? She wants to be with the people, all right? She sings it out. So there are different worlds of reactions. You have Flounder, who's just like, yeah, whatever you want to do. Isn't that great, basically? You have Sebastian, who's like, no, you need to listen to your parents. They know best. You have the parent who's like, no, you shouldn't do this because humans are dangerous. Then you have Scuttle, who is like, humans are really curious. Aren't they interesting? Those are all different worldviews. And that's one reason why all the characters feel distinct from one another. So you may want to ask yourself that. What are all the different worldviews to this problem? If somebody wants to become the gold medalist, you might have some people that are thinking, well, do you want to sacrifice all you need to do to be a gold medalist? Is it safe to even try to do that? Yeah, you should do it. That's amazing. Um, who cares? What does it matter to you? You have a lot of different possibilities, and those are great ways to brainstorm your other characters and again give your characters distinctions from one another, because that's one of the most common things that has to happen in a rewrite is characters getting dropped, combined, etc. So again, if you want to save yourself some trouble later, think about this and give them those distinct roles now. Not to mention, it will just make the story more vibrant, right? Versus having to do that at the seventh, eighth, ninth rewrite or something like that. Do you have plausible thematic depth? Now, you can be a little bit cautious about this because if you lean too much into theme in your drafting, you can sometimes be super heavy handed. But what you do want to think about right now is just take a step back and just ask yourself, why do I care about this? Why am I excited about it? I love this idea. Why? And psychoanalyze yourself a little bit. Be your best shrink. Ask yourself questions about, the classic cliches or questions about your parents and questions about your relationship. No, but like ask yourself, what is motivating me to write this to a certain extent? Kind of put that to the side because you're not sure yet. Even planners probably not sure yet. Put it to the side. And then when you finish it, really ask yourself, okay, I told a good story. How much of this is in there? And what you might find is that some of it is and some of it isn't. But you will more than likely find that some of it does come through in the execution. And then you can decide, do I turn up the temperature or not? But it's good to ask yourself this question. If you can't give yourself any answer at all, then it could just mean you're not very good at self analyzing in that manner, right? Which is okay. That's not nothing to be ashamed about. But it also could mean that maybe your story is a bit shallow, that it's not speaking to something that deep within you, that it's kind of fun and it's silly, but it's not deep enough. And yeah, fun and silly can work. You can write fun and silly stories just for this purpose of entertainment, and that's okay. But even then, often that if it's a really great comedy, there's satire, there's a point, there's a reason, even if it's about distracting people from the world or something like that. You know, presenting a world that doesn't really exist, escapism, things like that. It does speak to something deeper. Excuse me, if it's going to be a story that really resonates. So keep that in mind. Ask yourself, what's the emotional journey for the audience that I'm trying to achieve? How do I want the audience to actually feel when they write this? Now, this would apply to any writing style. Doesn't matter if you're a planner, pantser, plantser, you're going to want to know this, right? Because, yeah, if you're writing it, you want to draft it correctly. It might depend on what kind of music you put on when you're writing, the way that you just approach it, right? You know, I know like Kara, our romance author, she talks about she's like if I'm writing a like love scene, I want to be in the right frame of mind and I want to like put on some music, have some wine, kind of kind of get myself in the mood as it were, right? Otherwise it's not going to feel real. On the other hand, though, of course we have Becca who has talked about writing it just wherever. I think she goes to a tax collecting office or something, and so that's fine. But my point is that even so, in her mind, she's thinking, what kind of experience do I want the readers to have, right? Always ask yourself, what is that emotional response I'm trying to get? Um, a little bit of letting it flow organically is okay, but we do want to have just the general direction of the book, right? The general direction of a romance generally is to inspire romantic, arousing, erotic feelings, right? The thriller is excitement, adrenaline. Mystery is intrigue, surprise. You know what I mean? So have that in mind. What is the basic building blocks of this story emotionally? I keep having surprise appearances by Becca. It's amazing. So there's another surprise appearance by Becca. Novel 90 Writing Challenge. If you haven't signed up for it, please do. We'll be sharing the link in the chat. You can also find it in AutoCrit on our hub page as well. It is free to join. You don't have to be a member to join, but by joining, you will become a AutoCrit free member. For those of you who would like to dive into the realm of iconic killer characters, Gareth is going to be presenting a fabulous workshop on this. He, of course, is our resident horror expert. He's in the middle of teaching Nightmare Fuel. But iconic killer characters, of course, is a great way for you to learn some of the wonderful tips and tricks and devices that writers use in order to, as it says, create iconic killer characters. So, if you want to do that, go ahead. We also will have a Pitch It event, and that is going to be, hold on, I've got to look at my schedule here. On Wednesday at 8 p.m., excuse me. And that's where you can come on and we will look at your suggestions. You can give us an elevator pitch or you can just give us an idea of a book you have. So, right now, if you want to just give us kind of your elevator pitch of the story you're working on for novel 90, that might be a great use of this time, right? Because you can come on and we can just say what we would think about it. And you don't have to use it as a reason to switch gears, but it might help you understand where the execution could be difficult and what you might want to hone in on and things like that. Of course, we have Romance Club coming back, and that is on Monday, and that is going to be at 9 p.m., and that's with the Love Story Doctor. Yes, so feel free to come in if you're having any trouble. This is, again, a great opportunity if you are planning or plancing or even pantsing your romance, right? If that's what you're working on for Novel 90, come on in. Let us know where it's at. We understand it's a work in progress. We will give you some feedback on that. Other than that, that was my presentation for today. Again, so happy to have you here for Novel 90. It's going to be a wonderful challenge. I'm looking forward to seeing you all again next time I have a chance. Bye, everybody. You have a wonderful